Welcome once again to our discussion about the laws of Shabbat. Today, in Shabbat Made Simple, part 7, we're going to continue our discussion about creating clothing from sheep. We're going to go through the final processes to go from this sheep right here to a suit. This particular suit is the world's most expensive suit, valued at $900,000. Just to review real quickly, we've gone through 9 steps already. The first step, of course, is shearing the sheep, cutting its hair, washing that wool, carding it, making it nice and smooth, spinning it, turning the wool into yarn, dyeing it, getting it the right color, weaving it, and weaving it. We learned 3 different steps and aspects of weaving clothing. Finally, when we need to, sometimes we will unweave the clothing as well. Those are the first 9 steps so far. Those steps took us, again, from our sheep until a piece of cloth. Today, in creating clothes from sheep, part 3, we're going to go from that cloth to our finished product, a suit. Let's begin with cloth, and this particular cloth, since I told you about the $900,000 suit, is actually the most expensive cloth in the world. It's vicuna wool. What we need to do is we need to take this wool from long bolts, long pieces of cloth, and turn it into the pieces, or the elements, of a suit. This, of course, is done through cutting. Now, the truth is there's a separate melacha called cutting, which we're going to discuss when we speak about leather clothing. This one really is closer to tearing, because we're taking 2 objects that were once put together and we're ripping them apart. The 2 objects, of course, if you remember from our previous class, is the warp and the weft. Similar, although you may not think of it immediately, would be opening an envelope or tearing apart any 2 objects that were stuck together. Great, so now we have the pieces, we have the elements of the suit, but we need to turn it into a suit. How do we do that, of course, is by sewing it together. So the 11th step, of course, would be sewing. Now, once again, I'm not a tailor, and quite honestly, I don't know how to sew very well either. However, similar to sewing would be putting together any 2 objects that were once separate. And of course, that would even include using Scotch tape. Now that only applies to putting 2 objects together in any way that it is either permanent or semi-permanent. Now we have our finished product. You may wonder, what else is there left to do? Well, the truth is there are 2 little minor steps, which are also very important, that could actually be considered to be part of sewing. And that is because as you finish sewing an area, you need to tie the thread in order that it doesn't fall out. And sometimes you're required to untie as well. Here you have a picture of all these different types of knots, because it's very important to know that for both tying and untying, there are 2 things that are important. One is that the knot has to be a kesher shel kayama, which means a knot which is permanent or semi-permanent, which would of course exclude a bow. And it also has to be a knot with some sort of expertise in it as well. So that pretty much concludes creating clothing from sheep, part 3. In this lesson, we went from clothing to a final suit. But this also concludes creating clothing from sheep altogether. And we went in 13 steps from a sheep, God's beautiful creation, to a suit, the creation of man. And once again, that is what is prohibited on Shabbat, taking God's beautiful creation and turning it into our basic human necessities: food, clothing, and shelter. Wishing you and your loved ones a very beautiful Shabbat Shalom.